The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to today's Mailers Hub webinar. We hope things are not too cold or too miserable where you are, whatever part of the country you're in. We're a couple of minutes away from starting. We have folks still coming in, so we're going to wait a little bit. So just hang tight, get yourself a beverage, something to eat, whatever may be your pleasure, and we'll be back to you shortly. Well, good afternoon again, folks. Welcome to today's Mailers Hub webinar. Today is the Tuesday of the month when we do our regular webinars, and today we're going to be talking about key employment issues that are relevant to manufacturers like mailing service providers who are unfortunately having to deal with the pandemic that's going on around us. Today's speakers are going to be Peter Lowe and Hannah Werguft. And Peter practices employment law with the main law firm of Brann and Isaacson. The firm represents employers, and Peter has been recognized since 2013 as best lawyer for management. He's worked closely with employers throughout the pandemic, counseling them on a myriad of workplace challenges they face. He's a frequent speaker and writer on employment law issues. Hannah is an associate at Brann and Isaacson, and she focuses on employment law as well. She graduated from the University of Maine Law School, and after graduation worked at Bath Iron Works, a major shipyard in Maine, before joining Brann and Isaacson. Of course, for those of you who don't know, Brann and Isaacson is a boutique law firm that represents large and small online and multi-channel companies and printers, commercial mail producers, and others, and is our recommended legal counsel for mail producers on all those issues. And we have a whole variety of contacts we can provide to you at Brann and Isaacson, and we truly appreciate their being a partner of ours and offering us some excellent information and great support, as you'll see today. So with that being said, please, Peter, take it away.
Thank you very much, Leo. Good afternoon, everybody. Hannah and I are here in Maine on this winter Tuesday. Feels like Monday, of course, with the holiday. And the frozen rain is driving against my window today. We're regretting that right here on the coast we're not getting snow. I think inland Maine is getting a good dumping. And I know some of you in parts of the country who aren't used to seeing all this white stuff have been severely in the deep freeze. It's kind of a little bit business as usual for us. Anyway, thanks for joining us this afternoon. We do have a PowerPoint deck, and the whole thing will be made available to folks. I tend to keep PowerPoint on the high level, and not overwhelm you with materials. We will be referring to some things today, and if there are some of the items that we refer to that would be helpful to get to you, we can certainly get them to Leo. There is so much guidance out there right now. Some of the tasks we found in these now 11 months of the pandemic is sifting through all of the information that's out there and being able to determine what's really important. And that's no easy task. So Hannah, could you share just sort of the agenda that we have today? And I'm going to walk through these issues, and if questions arise during the presentation, I'm always very happy to address those. I'd say from the sort of the overview point of view, I work and Hannah, we work with employers of all sizes, and employers in manufacturing, employers in the service industry, in retail. And I've said throughout this pandemic, one clearly is never going to achieve perfection in complying with whether it's CDC, state, OSHA, federal requirements, state requirements. You can drive yourself crazy if you wanted to absorb it all, and at the same time keep your businesses alive and viable and running, if at all possible. And there, lawyers, we tend to have actually many habits. Some of them are not great habits, but one thing is we can sometimes present to you as employers, as businesses, as sort of the sky's falling in syndrome. And I've never found that that's particularly welcome or particularly helpful. And certainly during the pandemic, there's plenty of cause for concern that the sky is falling in, but you've had to keep going, we've had to keep going. And in my overall view, and I think it will address a number of these items that we talk about this afternoon, is that yeah, you're going to face a multitude of risks, and legal risks just being one of those. And our task is to not have you frozen in place because you could violate allegedly the confidentiality of an employee under the Americans with Disabilities Act or your state law, but instead, offer you some practical thoughts, solutions, guidance that, of course, our goal is to make sure you comply as closely as you can to all of those legal requirements, but at the same time, be able to run your business. Here's one example, and it was just to put sort of flesh on the bones of what I'm talking about. I can guarantee that many of you have had to deal with the question of what do we do when an employee has tested positive or an employee has had symptoms of COVID and has been working. And I remember last year, back in March and April, that was an extremely hot topic, and I get far less questions about that right now. But as one client pointed out to me the other day, our legal advice, to say, well, you can't identify that employee, you've got to be respectful of confidentiality. And he said, that's all very well and good, Peter. I get that, and I understand you need to say that. But he said, I have people who have someone severely compromised at home, and they're in a great state of anxiety when they hear they worked with someone who may have tested positive for COVID, and I'm not telling them who it is. And that's, to me, is a classic example of sort of the constraints of confidentiality, which we as lawyers somewhat preach, and the practical reality on the ground. The other practical reality on the ground is that people invariably figure it out, certainly in the smaller workplaces, who that person is. That person, is no longer at work. They may not be in work for 10 days, 14 days, whatever the requirements are. I don't raise that example to say I have the simple solution, but I think it clearly represents one of the, some of the tensions, some of the that you face in trying to do the right thing, but be, conscious of the needs of your employees, conscious of safety. The items that we're going to cover, obviously COVID's right at the forefront of all of this. I will be talking about vaccinations. That's kind of a positive development that we've all been talking about, and there's some legal issues and workplace concerns. We obviously have change on the federal level, and what does that mean for COVID and some of the issues you're dealing with? I'll address that. Question that I get frequently from employers is, what liability could I face, and are there means to address that? So we'll talk about that, and there are some privacy issues. So Hannah, can we move onto the slide? This is a kind of a smorgasbord of COVID issues, all ones that we've been addressing day in, day out. So hopefully they're ones that are on point for you in your workplace, in your environment. One of the biggest developments from a legal point of view was right back at the beginning of the pandemic, this FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act. At breakneck speed, a new federal law was developed. By, I think it was April 3rd or 4th, the law was in place, and Congress, for once, reacted with alacrity, and clearly the circumstances dictated that. And this is a paid leave law. I think many of you will be familiar with it. And as I suspect many of you are employers of less than 500 employees, then this law applied to you, applied to your workforce, at least until the end of last year, December 31st, the law ran its course. So much happens so quickly, but you may remember that late in December, Congress acted again, and in extending some additional stimulus benefits, they passed a voluntary extension to this law. How can you voluntarily extend the law? Well, what they said is that employers may choose to continue to provide this leave to employees, and through the end of March would be eligible for the payroll tax credits that the law affords, if you do it right. I'm not going to talk a lot more about that because my sense has been this good level of understanding, but it's for want of a better term, it is the federal pandemic leave law, and you can always debate on all of these things, both the burden and the effectiveness. But I know many employers have used this law when employees have had to quarantine, whether they've had COVID, whether they've had an exposure to COVID, and it's provided some paid leave options. I've got on here, so unpaid pandemic leave, and I realize I'm speaking to folks in different states, and I'm not going to even possibly tackle the vagaries of state law and what you may be required to do in your state under state law. But what the situation that I've seen, and it would apply to printers operating a manufacturing plant, is there are going to be some people, hopefully a relatively small number, who've never been comfortable or have not been able to return to work. I certainly got clients who've found themselves in that situation, and there's been an understandable reluctance to separate those people, to terminate those people. My advice to employers is, if someone is not at work, if someone is not coming to work, don't leave them in endless limbo. Put them into a classification. And so, your handbooks will contain by now 7, 8, 9, 10 different types of leave. There's so many different leaves that have been provided by policy and legislation. Sometimes these folks will have used up FMLA or other types of leave that have what I would call a shelf life, that have a defined period, 12 weeks or whatever it is. And so some of our clients have been asking, well, what do I do? She's a valuable employee. She's, she's understandably still not able or willing to return to work. And it's a very case-by-case basis. If in fact it's a critical position and you need to replace it and you can't replace it with a temporary employee, you might not be able to maintain that person on your payroll. But in other circumstances, and many folks have done it now, is they've created an unpaid pandemic leave, and the hardship of the leave being unpaid and the expense of paid is mitigated by usually these folks being eligible to receive unemployment. And obviously during last year that was significantly supplemented, and it appears there will be some additional supplement. Enough on leaves. I wanted to address an issue that it's come up relatively recently, and I mentioned already, and I have a little bit more detail on it. With the change from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, what we can expect is a lot more, at least, issuing of guidance, and the guidance may in fact be requirements. Suffice to say, there's the organized labor in particular and employee groups viewed some of the federal agencies, OSHA in particular, as being insufficiently protective of employees during the pandemic. And I'm not commenting one way or another whether that was the case, but that's certainly been the view that's been expressed. So there will undoubtedly be pressure on the new administration and the new leadership of OSHA to provide more teeth into both guidance, rules, and enforcement and inspections. One of the things they recently said, which I hadn't observed in earlier guidance, is if you were testing your employees, so if you're one of those environments where you've had employee testing for COVID, whether you've done it on a weekly basis, whether you've done it for just a narrower group of employees, whatever your practice has been, the federal government is now saying that it hasn't been enforced as a rule yet. There's a distinction here between a rule and guidance, but the guidance is that your employees should be providing the equivalent, should provide the equivalent of informed consent for being tested. What does that really mean? We're looking for a little bit more guidance on that, but it seems to be that you're going to be providing information, or whoever's doing the testing, information to employees that enables them to make that decision regarding the testing. That doesn't mean that you can't mandate testing still. That's something that the federal government has said. But what it does mean probably is that if an employee decides they do not want to be tested, you may prohibit them from working, but that doesn't translate to the same equivalent of and therefore you may terminate them. I'm not sure many of you would go down that road, but that's an issue that's recently come up. the federal government will be hiring new inspectors. There will be a considerable increase in the enforcement and inspection by OSHA. That's been stated very clearly, and it will happen. It's much harder to change federal law. We know, where the balance of power is now in the Congress, and obviously it's razor thin, but Democrats hold control of both the Senate and the House. But still, passing legislation remains, an extremely arduous task. On the other hand, hiring a whole bunch of new OSHA inspectors is a much easier way to kickstart enforcement and inspection. As timely for our audience today, in Hannah, who put a lot of this together, helpfully included the link here in our slides. But CDC, in partnership with OSHA, updated their manufacturing workers and employers guidance on February 5th. So about 10 days ago, that guidance was updated. Some of you may be familiar with that guidance. Some of you may have reviewed it. OSHA and CDC actually did a good job. They also have a higher level document. It's called Key Strategies. It's 1 page versus the 13 pages for that COVID-19 that I've given as a link there. I'm not going to walk you through that guidance. I would suggest that if you have, one specific person in your workplace who's the workforce coordinator, the COVID coordinator, whoever's been lucky enough to grab that title, I think it's valuable to spend the time to go through this more detailed guidance and compare it with what your internal practices and policies are. And I went through it again this morning, and so much of it is now second nature to us, and I bet you it's second nature to you. And whether you're obviously requiring the social distances and the cleaning and the face coverings and the PPE and leaves and screening, all things that last March, if people had started to ask about, none of us would have had any clue. And sign of the reality today is those are all very, very familiar to us. But there's good detail in the guidance. And one of the reasons I recommend, even if you feel like, yeah, we're in a pretty good place, we've had our ups and downs, but we've managed to keep our doors open, to keep the employees at work for the most part, and avoid exposures, or if we had exposures or outbreaks, we've dealt with them. But you can certainly benefit from looking through this type of more detailed guidance, not only to make sure you've asked the right questions, you've thought about the right strategies, you're doing things that reflect what are the recommendations. But here's a couple of other significant reasons for that. Number one, as I said already, we've got a change in Washington, and I think it's very likely that what is guidance now may in fact translate and become requirements. And when something becomes a requirement or a rule or a standard by OSHA, and it may be done through an emergency basis, then if you're not doing it and there's an inspection, you obviously can suffer the consequences. So this would be both a great way to measure, how up to speed are we right now? Are there things that we haven't thought of? Are there things that we want to put in place that are practical and feasible, and put us in a good position if under a new administration, what has previously been guidance suddenly becomes a requirement. And the other reason that I've been recommending this to employers throughout the pandemic is you know, as lawyers, I've got that last bullet, the legal exposure. It sounds very pragmatic, and it is very pragmatic. You're motivated in the first place to keep your business running and keep your employees and your customers or your contractors, your vendors safe. But there certainly has been an increase, and I expect we'll see more of lawsuits that do arise as a result of COVID. And really, the two types of lawsuits that we are seeing and hearing about are either I was infected at work and the consequences as a result of a COVID infection, or I was infected at work and then a family member became infected. And obviously in the very worst case, there's a very serious illness or fatality. And what does that mean legally for an employer? You probably know this, but just a reminder: if your employees get sick, pretty much in every state that I'm aware of, that's going to, if they can prove that the exposure and the infection resulted from work, then that's going to fall under a workers' comp policy. And frankly, that's in legal terms relatively good news, because that's an insured risk for you. And it's also one where under almost all state workers' comp programs, the exposure is more limited, still significant, but much more limited. The other type of legal claim that every business should be aware of is what we will lawyers call a tort claim. And the tort claim is a claim based on the argument that you as the employer, as the business, were negligent. And we all know that term. And negligence is a very broad and somewhat amorphous concept. It's one that you failed to act with a reasonable degree of care to keep your employees safe. And I mentioned that if one of your employees gets sick, they can't bring a negligence claim. But if a family member gets sick, they're not covered by the workers' comp policy. And that's where potentially these tort claims can rear their ugly heads. I don't mean to talk too much about the Congress and politics, but there was a big effort by the Republicans to get immunity from lawsuits, and that failed. And as it failed, while at least the Senate was controlled by the Republicans, it's not going to. I can't see that there's going to be any immunity that's going to be on the horizon. So think about how to mitigate and manage your liability, and hence my reinforcement of those guidelines and taking a look at those. All right. Thanks, Hannah. That's perfect timing. Vaccines. We all know that vaccines are in some cases trickling out. In some cases, we're getting a reasonable number of people vaccinated in that phased vaccination. The threshold question for employers, and one that I'm not going to spend much time on, because I'm going to guess that very few of you are looking at a mandatory vaccination program. I've spoken a lot on this topic, and the other day I'd actually, for the first time in 11 months, I was in front of a live audience, and so I was able to say, hey, raise your hand if you're thinking about doing a mandatory vaccination, and nobody did. And I said, well, you just saved yourselves 10 minutes of my discussion of mandatory versus voluntary. And I'm going to assume if you all raised your hands, if I asked you to raise your hands, you're going to say, no, we're not going to mandate it. We're going to do it it's going to be voluntary. Some of you may be encouraging your employees to be vaccinated. And I did get this question the other day. What does that look like? and how far should employers go? Well, a client of mine here in Maine, major automobile dealership, many different dealerships, they decided to pay a $200 equivalent of a stipend to every employee who gets vaccinated. Employees don't have to, but they receive that $200 if they get vaccinated. This client clearly sees the benefit of having a vaccinated workforce. And believe it or not, and this is perhaps what keeps lawyers in full employment, is there are some limits on how much incentive you can provide to employees. So those of you who are looking to provide an incentive, I should tell you there's a federal rule out there that suggests incentives should be modest, minimal. One of the rules talks about giving somebody a free water bottle or giving them so that's really a token. Remember I said at the beginning, there's this world that we live in where lawyers can tell you there's risks under every rock and around every corner. If you're thinking about providing an incentive for a vaccine, I wouldn't lose sleep over Peter Lowe saying, by the way, there is a school of thought that says you can't provide too much. But wanted to mention that to you. There are the religious and disability exemptions really relate to if you mandate vaccines at a very high level. If you require someone to be vaccinated, healthcare and other industries are much more likely to do that. If someone says they're personally, philosophically opposed to a vaccine, that's not a reason where you'd have to exempt them, but either disability or religion would be a basis. Couple of guidances have come out. I don't know if there will be more. OSHA and the EEOC, which is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. One thing that I've been talking to clients about more regularly is that right now, you as employers are doing a whole bunch of things that in normal circumstances you would never be allowed to do relating to employee health. You might be taking temperatures. You might be asking about their symptoms. You might be mandating that they take a COVID test. None of those things in normal circumstances would be legal. They would all potentially violate this federal law that I think we all know about, or familiar with, at least the Americans with Disabilities Act. And not to get into the legal weeds, but you don't have to be disabled to be protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's a lot of provisions in there that protect employees from unwarranted medical tests, medical questions, protect the confidentiality of medical information. And many of those, while they haven't been suspended, have been watered down based on the fact that we're in a pandemic. And that's when I refer to EEOC guidance, that's what the federal government has provided in guidance, that this is a one-off, this is an exceptional situation, and we can ask about medical issues. I'm an optimist, and we're going to get through this and beyond this. And I think we're going to have to retrain our supervisors, say, hold on a minute, remember these are the guardrails. There are things that were fine during a pandemic that we can no longer do. That's a little bit down the road, but be thinking about that. The last thing on vaccines, and then we'll move on to the next topic, is there's been very recent guidance that in some instances the mandatory quarantines will not apply to vaccinated employees. You want to go and see that CDC guidance. I'm not going to summarize it all now, but it is in the CDC guidance. It's not automatically, it's after the 2 vaccines and then that period that I think it's 14 days, but I may have that wrong. But for all other purposes, you know, the guidance right now is that the vaccinated people in your workplace should observe all the other safety requirements that you impose, face coverings, and the like. And I think we may see additional developments on that. So that's vaccines. This one will be relatively quick. I included in here just a couple of other items that aren't specifically COVID related, but while I have you and we've got, you know, new things developing or on the horizon, I wanted to mention them to folks with the types of workforces that you have. More enforcement on the horizon. Mentioned that already. I expect that we saw the FFCRA. I mentioned that. That was a temporary measure providing paid leave. Without any question, there's going to be paid leave on the agenda, whether it is passed into a federal mandate. Your guess is as good as mine. And certainly we're seeing more and more states imposing separate and independent paid leave requirements. We're as I said earlier, we're in Maine, and as of January this year, our legislature passed a law where every employee, temporary, per diem, contract, seasonal, with some exceptions, is entitled to unpaid leave, and they're entitled to this leave for any reason whatsoever. And they're entitled up to 40 hours in a year. That's just here in Maine. But if you look at, you know, how things develop, those types of laws get passed from state to state. Some of you may have that already, some of you may not, but could be on the way. I also wanted to mention, I don't know, in some jurisdictions there has been emergency pay, or what has also been referred to as pandemic pay. The city where I'm currently have my office passed an ordinance for emergency pay that would be a minimum of $18 an hour, and that's had a big ripple effect through the business community. The other issue that I see that folks really need to pay attention to, depending on your workplace, where you're located, the degree of unionization in your workplace, but probably one of the biggest changes that we will see, and it's one of the things that's easiest for the federal government to sort of flip like a switch, is the laws that relate to unionization. And the National Labor Relations Board is the board that addresses unionization issues, and that is a very politically influenced board. It remains under Republican control. By, I think, fall, it will be under Democratic control, and we'll see a lot of changes in the ease and speed of unionization, and frankly, how handbooks are also addressed. That's all I'm going to say on that topic, because there's more down the road. One of the things that gets overlooked a little bit when, you know, some of the discussions we've had about COVID and managing COVID in the workplace and dealing with COVID is when you get to the situation which, you know, any good-sized employer has to face at some point, is letting somebody go, terminating an employee. It's a necessary evil, if you like, of any business, and something that as lawyers we get a lot of exposure to. And the simple reason for that is the number one risk of liability for any business in the US. The most common claim by far is an employment claim, and maybe we call it a wrongful termination, and usually it's built on an allegation that the employee fell in a protected class and was discriminated against, and that was the reason for their termination, not the reason the employer gave. What should we be thinking about in COVID world with employee terminations? I've always had these conversations with clients. I call them termination assessments. And the client calls me, seems frequently to be on a Friday for some reason. And they say, Peter, we've had it. I'm going to pick on Hannah. With Hannah, it's time to end her employment. And usually it's Friday and they want to do it by the end of the day. And one very practical thing that I've learned in working with clients is hit the pause button. The decisions that you make, which have been bottled up for sometimes months or even years with a poor performing employee, they don't need to be made immediately. But the psychology of that is the person, once they finally, the supervisor, manager, director, whomever has finally made the decision, then they just want to get it done and over with, and sleep on it, think about it, get advice. And in those conversations I have, what I call the termination assessment, I've added, these new questions, and I've laid them out for you, because we used to say, well, how old is the person? What race is the person? Sexual orientation? You all know the list of protected classes that a person could assert, hey, that's illegal if that was a motivating or influencing factor. But in COVID times, I'm definitely asking these questions, and perhaps the one that to date has resulted in the most claims is a person who has been a squeaky wheel, and they may be a poor performer, they may have a poor attitude, but intermingled with all of that, they've been very vocal about COVID and COVID safety, and feel that you haven't enforced your face coverings requirement, or you had people back to work too soon, or people aren't spaced enough. It could be any of those things. And that person, in expressing those views, is probably, in most states, a whistleblower. And therefore, before you terminate somebody, you want to make an assessment. Could that person check that box? Or, I've got other bullets here, I'm not going to read them out, but any of those could result in an employee asserting that they have some degree of legal protection. I'd be doing everybody a disservice if I left it there, because you'd say to me, Peter, I have to run my business, and people are savvy enough now that they may do that just to try to protect themselves. Does that mean they have a job for life? And I say, no, of course not. But it gets to the basis for the reason that you're letting them go. Some regrettably have had to do reductions in force. If you're doing a reduction in force, and the three people who you you reduce in force, are the three outspoken people about COVID, then you may well face a problem. If you've done it through a much more systematic, objective, fair manner, measuring the different skills of the people you have, scoring them, then you're going to have a defense to that. So always, when you are looking at the need to downsize, the need just on an individual basis to eliminate a position, to terminate somebody for performance, terminate someone for conduct, I'm asking these questions now, and I think they need to be asked, and you want to at least understand what the risks associated with it. One of the things.
Peter, can I jump in there? I got a quick question from one of our listeners.
Great.
Has anyone terminated an employee for not properly wearing a mask or not covering their nose Are there any ramifications for doing so, for not wearing a mask or not wearing it properly?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I've known of terminations for not wearing a face covering. I know one for failure to properly follow a quarantine requirement, and I'm not aware of any law or right or protection that employee would have that would give them a viable claim if that's the reason. And the way I would advise a client is if that's an important safety requirement and you have a practice of terminating employees for violating safety requirements, particularly during a pandemic, then that's a solid ground to stand on. There's certainly been debate and noise and discussion about, well, do I have a legal right to refuse? Do I have a constitutional right? The fairly simple answer there is no, and none of the courts have recognized that. The one place that you want to have I put the caution flag out there is if the person says, I can't wear that because of a disability, then if you terminated them, you could face a disability discrimination case. So where someone says, I can't wear one because of a disability, you're going to do what you do with any other employee who says it has a disability. Discuss, well, what's the alternative? Can you work from home? Could you wear a face shield? Can you work in a location where you won't be within 6 feet of anybody? So there's more homework to do on the question with a disability. But yeah, that's a really good question. We have a claim currently, not from an employee, but from a parent who refused to wear a face covering and sued a school district, and has made some of those arguments. And my prediction is that he's not going to be successful, but hopefully I'm not proven wrong. It's been, early on in the pandemic, we were handling day in, day out questions about face coverings. And, I've seen all of these issues go sort of in cycles, and we see less and less of that right now. I don't know whether that's throughout, whether it's specific or local to us, or whether it's everywhere, but less of that. This slide, I'm not going to do any more than mention, that I'd be remiss. You're all in different locations in different states, and you may have some state-specific laws that you either are aware of or should be educated on. And we just pointed out three states. I know some of you are in Virginia, and Virginia, I think, is one of the very first states to actually make its workplace safety it's no longer a guidance, but a requirement or a rule. So be vigilant to those. All right, Hannah, do you want to? You're the privacy expert. As long as you're not muted, do you want to just touch a little bit on this issue?
Sure. Wouldn't say I'm an expert, wouldn't go there, but happy to do a brief overview of some of the privacy law considerations when we talk about certain contact tracing technologies and other technologies that some employers are using in their workplaces to keep folks safe. So the first one that really comes to mind for a lot of people is HIPAA. But the big takeaway here is that HIPAA really applies to a narrow subset of healthcare providers, certain health plans, and the entities that work with those healthcare providers and health plans. So probably will not apply to the folks in attendance today. Some other things that might apply, however, are either the FTC health breach notification rule, or, depending on where you operate, certain state laws, such as the Illinois Biometric Privacy Act. So again, like Peter was talking about with some of the unpaid leave issues, hard to go into detail on every state law and the nuances there, but just something to be aware of when you are using different either screening applications or some high-tech thermal imaging technologies in the workplace. These are just things to keep in mind and things to explore any risks and liabilities there.
Hey, Hannah, one of the things I actually read this morning was in, I think it was in the CDC guidance. Under OSHA, OSHA takes the position that if you're taking temperature checks and you're creating records relating to those temperature checks, which many of you may be doing, or some of you may be doing, you have a record retention requirement. And put it this way, that your record retention requirement is probably going to outlive at least me. It's for the duration of your employee's employment, who knows how long that will be, plus 30 years. And I remember writing some record retention policies for clients, and OSHA have just the most incredibly long requirements. And it's just worse, this privacy issue does come up. I said before, you're asking a lot of questions that in normal circumstances you couldn't ask. You're gathering a lot of data too. You're gathering a lot of information, or you may be. And it's certainly information that is confidential employee information. And you're going to want to be thoughtful and mindful about where you keep it. By the way, no medical information should ever go into an employee's personnel file. The federal law, the ADA, says that employee medical information has to be kept separately. It has to be on a very limited access, need to know basis amongst supervisors. It has to be, you used to say it has to be in a separate locked filing cabinet, and that obviously betrays how long I've been practicing employment law, because I don't think many of us are putting things in locked filing cabinets any longer, as much as some secure location on our system. We have a few slides right at the end here. I think, Hannah, do we have those COVID lawsuits by state? I give the credit to Safe Offshore, a law firm who put this survey together. And you can see, this is giving us sort of an indication of where, not surprisingly, the sort of some of the hotbeds and then the relatively quiet places, not good for our business here in Maine. You can see us there with our little gray dot. Fortunately, we represent clients all over the place, all over the country. And I don't think there's any great takeaway other than, you can certainly see some of the more heavily populated states. I think the next one is sort of more instructive for all of us, and it may be a little small, but you can see the different reasons for a lawsuit. And by far, just runaway is the termination. So that's back to my little bit of a discussion about the factors when you're terminating somebody. By the way, just a note on that. This was brand new in the very latest guidance that came out from the federal government. They had this line in there that said, basically a cautionary note to employers that if you have an employee who on social media is complaining about safety related to COVID, but it would be for other reasons too, in fact, understand that you may not retaliate against that person. And that was, I was sort of, that one caught my eye. And I think we've had certainly the calls from clients that say, you can't believe what this employee has done. They've gone onto Facebook and they just trashed us. And we're doing everything right. We've from the beginning, we've been working closely with safety people. We've spent a lot of money. We've, doing everything right. And yet, we're out on Facebook and they're tarnishing our name, and we'd like to fire them. And the advice I would give all of you is if you have an employee who has been on social media, and endless means to do that now, and it's come to your attention, get advice. Tread carefully, because there are both the whistleblower, the retaliation issues. There are also some other federal law issues that you need to navigate. It doesn't always mean that you're not going to be able to do something, but you certainly have to tread carefully. And I was just interested that was flagged. And then one more, I think, and what the last slide we have just shows the sort of the breakdown by industry, and we're going to a manufacturing group here, and you'll see that healthcare has been the most hit by lawsuits. We all know that the healthcare industry is massive, but manufacturing is certainly right up there in terms of this is national data lawsuits by industry. That sort of concludes the issues we want to address out in our slides. I will just, I think we've got like 2 or 3 minutes left, and unless there's questions, I will just flag an issue that I see coming down the pike. And for those of you who don't have remote employees, it's not going to be an issue, but many employers do. Some are almost exclusively remote. The notion of going back into a big office building seems less likely. But what you're going to, for those who have employees who are working remotely, and you ask them at a certain point to come back into work, an issue that we're going to see without doubt is employees who say, no, I don't, not only I don't want to come back into work, I'm quite happy where I am, but you're going to have employees who say that they are unable to come back into work because of a medical condition and possibly a disability. And if that disability issue is raised, then you're going to have back to, I was talking before, that duty to have a discussion with an employee about the disability, and the issue will be, is it a reasonable accommodation to continue to work at home, or is working on site in the office, in the plant, in the manufacturing facility, is it an essential function of that person's job? And that's an ADA legal term. And an issue that we've dealt with pre-pandemic, but it's going to become more prevalent, is working together side by side, attending meetings in person, being with your colleagues, your peers, your team members. Is that essential to a job or not? The pendulum surely has shifted on that, given our ability to use Zoom and all the other technology. But what I see is clients calling me up and saying, I really want Hannah to come back to work. I don't think she's doing a great job remote. I'd like to have eyes on her. And Hannah is saying, unfortunately, I'd love to come back, but medically I can't. And that's going to be an issue that we're going to be dealing with and addressing and wrestling with employers. So that was sort of a down the road issue for those of you who still have some remote employees. And some industries, of course, lend themselves very well to a remote workforce, and that will realize savings and maybe the future, but we'll see. And I'm looking at my little clock here, Leo, and I think we are right on.
Did a great job of bringing this home right on time. Your comments about people coming back to work, I think, are very true. Many of our subscribing companies have office employees, and the flexibility they have with them is different than the employees who work on the production floor, of course, for obvious reasons. But I'm sure each group is going to be facing some different challenges, and it was good to have you give us some advice today about what those challenges may be. For the benefit of the folks attending today, you can see there's a slide there with some contact information. As I mentioned at the top of the program, Brann and Isaacson is a partner of ours, and they've been gracious enough to offer our subscribers the chance for a little bit of free advice from time to time, and sort of a break on some of the services that they might need to purchase, if you will, for longer term support. But it's good to have them on our side. Good to have their advice, and it's been great to have Peter and Hannah today on the presentation. We really appreciate your contribution. I think we don't have anything in the question box, but if you do have questions, you can contact me or contact Peter or Hannah directly. I want to thank all of our attendees today. Well, of course, I want to thank our presenters, Peter Lowe and Hannah Wickford up in lovely Portland, Maine. We want to appreciate their getting to work today. I want to thank Michelle for being able to keep all the lights on the system here, not leaving it to me to do badly. And of course, I want to thank all of you for calling in. Our next webinar is on March 16th, and we look forward to seeing many of you back, or all of you back at that time. So until then, thank you again. We'll talk to you later. Stay safe. Bye.